Whatever you do, Emily Carter whispered to herself as her trembling fingers tightened around the small glass bottle hidden inside her coat pocket. Don't let the Alpha King smell your heat. The words had become less of a reminder and more of a prayer over the past 3 years, ever since the night she had been rejected beneath the sacred moon altar and branded as an Omega no respectable wolf would ever choose. In Blackwood Kingdom, rejection did not simply break a heart. It reshaped an entire life. Doors quietly closed. Conversations stopped when you entered a room. Every smile carried pity. Every glance carried judgment. Emily had survived it all by becoming invisible. She worked before sunrise in the Royal Herb House, gathering bundles of mountain sage, cedar needles, moon mint, and every rare plant known to soften in Omega's natural scent. While others believed she had dedicated herself to healing, only Emily knew the truth. Every blend, every bottle, every sleepless night had one purpose. Hide the heat, hide the scent, hide herself. This morning the kingdom buzzed with unusual excitement. Servants hurried across polished stone courtyards carrying banners embroidered with silver wolves, while guards polished armor until it reflected the morning sun like mirrors. Even the stable hands spoke in hushed voices. The Alpha King was returning from a month-long journey along the northern border. King Nathaniel Blackwood rarely remained inside the capital for long. He preferred the forests, the mountain passes, and the villages where ordinary wolves lived. Stories about him traveled faster than the royal messengers. Some claimed he could sense lies before they were spoken. Others insisted his wolf had never once submitted to another alpha in challenge. Emily tried never to listen. Legends were dangerous because they made people forget that kings were still people. People could reject. People could disappoint. People could unknowingly destroy someone else's future. She reached the herb shelves and carefully uncorked another bottle. A cool mixture of cedar and mountain mint filled the air. She brushed several careful drops across the inside of her wrists and along the edge of her collar. The familiar scent settled around her like a shield. For a brief moment, relief softened the knot inside her chest. Then it happened. A sudden wave of warmth rolled through her body, gentle at first, then stronger, stealing the air from her lungs. She grabbed the wooden work table before her knees weakened. No, not today. It wasn't supposed to happen for another week. She counted her breaths exactly as the elderly healer had taught her. 1, 2, 3. The warmth refused to fade. Instead, it spread quietly beneath her skin like sunlight slipping through winter clouds. Panic tightened around her heart. The suppressant had never failed this early before. She reached for another bottle with unsteady fingers, but it slipped from her grasp and shattered against the stone floor. Glass scattered in every direction as the sharp fragrance of crushed herbs rushed through the room. Emily stared at the broken bottle in horror. She had no spare mixture with her. Footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the hallway outside. Calm, measured, unmistakably royal. Servants immediately fell silent. She heard respectful greetings ripple through the corridor one after another until the entire building seemed to hold its breath. The king was already inside the palace. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. She hurried to gather the broken glass before anyone entered, her hands shaking despite every effort to steady them. Another warm pulse swept through her body, stronger than before. She closed her eyes, silently begging the moon goddess for one more day, one more hour, even one more minute. Outside the herb house, the footsteps stopped. Complete silence followed. Then a deep voice, calm enough to command without ever rising, spoke only a few feet beyond the doorway. Someone dropped cedar and moon mint. Emily froze. That's an unusual combination. Emily lowered her eyes before the doorway, afraid that even meeting the king's gaze would somehow expose the secret she had guarded for years. The silence stretched until she finally heard slow footsteps crossing the threshold of the herb house. She forced herself to keep collecting the broken pieces of glass, although her fingers trembled enough to betray her composure. A pair of polished black boots stopped only a few feet away. She did not need to look up to know who stood there. Every servant in Blackwood Palace described the same quiet authority. Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood never demanded attention. He simply possessed it. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice carried no accusation, only calm concern that caught her off guard. Emily quickly shook her head. "No, Your Majesty. I only dropped one of the bottles." He remained silent for another moment, studying the shattered herbs scattered across the stone floor. That mixture is uncommon, he observed. Most healers use lavender and pine this time of year. Emily searched desperately for an answer that sounded ordinary. Mountain mint lasts longer during summer, Your Majesty. Nathaniel slowly nodded, yet something in his expression suggested he was listening to more than her words. His wolf sensed details that escaped everyone else. The faint rhythm of her breathing, the unusual blend of herbs surrounding her, the nervous way she kept her shoulders tense as though expecting judgment before it arrived. Before either of them spoke again, another servant hurried inside carrying a stack of royal records. Your Majesty, the council is waiting. Nathaniel did not immediately move. Instead, his silver eyes drifted briefly across the rows of drying herbs hanging from the wooden beams overhead. The palace smells different today, he said quietly, almost to himself. Someone has worked very hard to hide one scent beneath another. Emily felt the warmth beneath her skin pulse again. She tightened her hands until her fingernails pressed into her palms. Please leave, she silently begged. Please do not stay another second. At last Nathaniel turned toward the door. Clean the glass carefully, he said. I would rather not have one of my healers injured over something so small. Then he walked away with the same measured steps that had announced his arrival. Only after his presence disappeared beyond the hallway did Emily finally release the breath she had been holding. Her knees weakened enough that she had to steady herself against the work table once again. She had survived. Barely. Across the palace, however, Nathaniel found it impossible to dismiss the encounter. During the morning council meeting, advisors debated border trade, harvest reports, and patrol routes, but fragments of unfamiliar scents continued drifting through his memory. Cedar, mountain mint, moon herbs. Beneath them all lingered something impossibly faint that vanished every time he tried to identify it. His uncle, Lord Benedict Blackwood, noticed his distraction. You seem unusually thoughtful today. Nathaniel looked toward the palace gardens beyond the tall windows. Have any new healers joined the palace staff? Benedict frowned. Several over the past few years. What? Nathaniel answered without looking away from the gardens. Someone is masking a scent with remarkable precision. His uncle chuckled softly. Healers spend their lives surrounded by herbs. Every corridor smells different. Nathaniel almost agreed, yet his instincts refused to settle. Wolves did not question their instincts without reason. Something inside him had stirred for only a heartbeat inside that herb house. Not desire, not curiosity, recognition. The feeling disappeared before he could understand it, leaving behind only restless silence. Meanwhile, Emily returned to her tiny room beneath the eastern tower, carrying fresh bundles of herbs clutched tightly against her chest. She immediately began preparing another suppressant mixture, measuring every leaf with practiced care despite her shaking hands. The elderly healer who had once taught her looked up from another table and quietly asked, "Did something happen?" Emily hesitated before answering. The king noticed the herbs. The older woman's expression grew serious. And did he notice anything else? Emily stared into the steaming mixture as tiny curls of fragrant vapor rose into the afternoon light. I do not know, she whispered, but I think my time is beginning to run out. The next morning, Emily convinced herself that yesterday had been nothing more than a close call, the kind that frightened a person only because fear had become a habit. She repeated the thought while preparing another fresh batch of herbal suppressants before dawn, measuring every leaf with absolute precision. The mixture had always protected her before. It had to work again. Outside the herb house, the palace slowly awakened beneath a sky painted with pale shades of gold. But the peaceful beginning lasted only a few minutes before hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. The royal steward entered carrying a leather folder stamped with the silver crest of Blackwood Kingdom. His sharp eyes searched the room until they landed on Emily. Emily Carter? She immediately set aside the mortar and pestle. Yes, sir. He unfolded the document and spoke with the practiced certainty of someone delivering orders rather than conversation. By command of His Majesty's household, you are reassigned to the royal wing beginning today. The king has requested expanded herbal support for the council chambers, private library, and residential gardens. Emily felt the color drain from her face. There must be some mistake. The steward glanced down at the royal seal. There is no mistake. Gather your supplies. You leave within 15 minutes. Before she could answer, he turned and disappeared into the hallway. The elderly healer beside her slowly placed a comforting hand over Emily's trembling fingers. Sometimes the path we fear is already choosing us. Emily forced a weak smile that never reached her eyes. She packed jars of dried herbs, fresh bundles of cedar, moon mint, lavender, and several carefully hidden bottles containing her personal suppressant mixture. Every step toward the royal wing felt heavier than the last. She had spent years avoiding places where the Alpha King regularly worked. Now she had been ordered directly into the center of his daily routine. The royal wing stood apart from the rest of the palace, surrounded by ancient white stone, quiet gardens, and towering windows that overlooked the northern mountains. Even the air felt different there, calmer yet somehow more powerful. Royal guards nodded politely as she entered, escorting her through elegant hallways lined with paintings of former Alpha Kings. Emily kept her head lowered, silently praying that her assignment would allow her to remain unnoticed. Instead, she was led directly into the king's private library. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with weathered books and carefully rolled maps. Sunlight poured through tall windows, warming polished oak floors. The room smelled of parchment, cedarwood, and faint traces of pine carried by the morning breeze. Place the calming herbs near the fireplace, one attendant instructed. His Majesty spends several hours here each afternoon. Emily carefully arranged small ceramic bowls filled with fresh herbs, making certain her own suppressant scent blended naturally with the room. If anyone noticed, it would appear to be part of the herbal treatment rather than something personal. She had almost finished when a familiar voice quietly broke the silence behind her. You work quickly. Emily turned so suddenly that one small bowl nearly slipped from her hands. Nathaniel stood only a few feet away, dressed simply in a dark charcoal coat without the ceremonial cloak he wore before the court. Away from the throne room, he appeared less like an untouchable ruler and more like a man carrying responsibilities few could imagine. Still, the quiet strength surrounding him filled every corner of the room. Emily lowered her gaze. I apologize if I disturbed your library, Your Majesty. You did not. He stepped closer, studying the fresh herbs arranged across the shelves. The room feels lighter already. Emily offered a polite nod, hoping the conversation had ended. Instead, Nathaniel paused beside one of the ceramic bowls and gently lifted a single cedar branch between his fingers. His wolf sensed the same faint mystery from the previous day. Beneath the carefully balanced herbs lingered an almost invisible scent that appeared for only a heartbeat before disappearing again. It refused to reveal itself, and that only deepened his curiosity. You understand herbs better than most palace healers, he observed. Emily answered carefully. Plants reveal themselves only to people willing to be patient. Nathaniel smiled almost imperceptibly. That is true of many things. Their eyes met for only an instant before Emily quickly looked away, but something inside both of them shifted with that single glance. Neither understood why the silence suddenly felt heavier than words. At that exact moment, another gentle wave of warmth stirred beneath Emily's skin. It remained hidden behind the herbal mixtures, but she recognized the warning immediately. The suppressant was fading far sooner than it should have. She excused herself as calmly as possible and left the library before anyone noticed her unsteady breathing. Nathaniel watched her disappear through the doorway, unable to explain why every instinct told him that the quiet healer was carrying far more than bundles of herbs. For the first time in years, his wolf did not want answers from a battlefield or a council meeting. It wanted answers from the woman who always seemed to vanish just before the truth could be found. By the third day inside the royal wing, Emily no longer feared being noticed. She feared becoming familiar. Routine was dangerous because routine invited conversation, and conversation required closeness. Every morning she refreshed the herbal arrangements in the library, replaced calming oils in the council chamber, and carried fresh cedar branches through the sunlit halls before the palace fully awakened. She memorized every corridor that allowed her to avoid unnecessary encounters, yet somehow their paths continued to cross. Nathaniel always appeared without warning, never interrupting her work, never asking more questions than necessary, yet always lingering just long enough for silence to become its own conversation. He would pause beside an open window while she arranged herbs across a shelf, or quietly examine an old map while she refreshed the fragrance in the room. Most rulers filled empty space with commands. Nathaniel filled it with observation. Emily could almost feel his attention following details no one else ever noticed. She responded by becoming even more careful. Every few hours, she slipped into the empty preparation room beneath the eastern staircase to renew the herbal suppressant covering her natural scent. The mixtures worked, but each application lasted a little less than the one before it. The bottles that once protected her for an entire day now barely lasted through the afternoon. She refused to admit what that meant. Instead, she convinced herself she simply needed stronger herbs, better measurements, more discipline. Late one afternoon, she carried fresh bundles of moon mint into the royal library, just as rain began tapping gently against the tall windows. The room had grown darker beneath heavy clouds, leaving only the warm glow of the fireplace dancing across polished wood. Nathaniel stood alone near one of the bookshelves, reading an old journal bound in faded leather. Without looking up, he said, "The rain always changes the scent of this room." Emily carefully placed the herbs into their ceramic bowls. "Fresh air carries different memories, Your Majesty." He closed the journal with quiet care. "You always answer as though every plant has a story." She offered a faint smile. "Perhaps they do." Nathaniel returned the smile so briefly that she almost believed she had imagined it. "And what story does cedar tell?" Emily hesitated before answering. "That strength can be quiet." He considered her words for a long moment. "Then what does moon mint say?" Her fingers paused above the bowl. "That some things are easier to hide than to heal." The answer settled between them with unexpected weight. Nathaniel studied her expression, sensing sadness beneath words that sounded almost accidental. Before he could respond, a soft breeze drifted through the open window, carrying away part of the carefully layered herbal fragrance surrounding her. For the briefest heartbeat, something else emerged beneath it. It was delicate, warm, almost impossible to recognize before it vanished again beneath cedar and mountain mint. Nathaniel's heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. His wolf stirred deep within him, not with aggression or hunger, but with unmistakable attention. The feeling lasted only an instant before disappearing completely. Emily noticed the subtle change in his expression and immediately stepped backward. "I should replace the herbs in the council chamber before evening." Nathaniel gave a small nod, although his thoughts remained fixed on the mysterious scent that refused to reveal itself. After she left, he walked toward the open window, letting the cool rain wash away every remaining fragrance in the room. It should have ended his curiosity. Instead, it sharpened it. Later that evening, he summoned the palace physician, an elderly healer who had served 3 generations of the Blackwood family. "Tell me something," Nathaniel said. "Can certain herbs completely conceal a wolf's natural scent?" The physician looked surprised by the question. "For a short time, yes. Rare combinations can soften or redirect familiar scents, especially for those trained in botanical medicine." Nathaniel folded his hands behind his back. "But not forever." "No, Your Majesty. Nature is patient. Eventually, it always returns to itself." Those words remained with Nathaniel long after the physician departed. Meanwhile, Emily stood alone beneath the eastern tower, staring at the nearly empty bottles lined across her small wooden table. She counted them twice, hoping she had overlooked another vial. She had not. Only enough remained for another day or two. Beyond her window, the full moon slowly climbed above the distant mountains, bright enough to paint silver across the palace rooftops. Emily closed the curtains with trembling hands, but she could not shut out the quiet certainty growing inside her heart. Whatever she had spent years hiding was beginning to slip beyond her control, and somewhere else inside the palace, without understanding why, the Alpha King had already begun searching for an answer he could not yet name. The following evening arrived beneath a flawless full moon, and Emily knew the moment she opened her eyes that something had changed. The familiar herbal shield that usually settled around her after dawn refused to hold. No matter how carefully she prepared the mixture, the warmth beneath her skin continued rising in slow, steady waves that no plant seemed able to calm. She worked through breakfast without drawing attention to herself, replacing dried herbs throughout the royal wing while silently counting every breath. 1, 2, 3. Slow and steady. It had always worked before. By midday, the bottles she carried beneath her cloak were nearly empty. She poured the last few drops across her wrists and collar, whispering a quiet apology to herself when she realized there would be no more after today. Across the palace, Nathaniel spent the afternoon reviewing trade agreements with neighboring territories, yet his attention wandered again and again toward the windows overlooking the gardens. Something felt unsettled. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his calm expression, listening for a sound that had not yet been made and searching for a scent that remained just beyond recognition. His advisors noticed his unusual silence, but none dared interrupt the king's thoughts. When the meeting finally ended, Nathaniel stepped into the palace gardens hoping the evening air would quiet the strange feeling inside him. Instead, the cool breeze carried a faint trace of cedar mixed with moon mint before it disappeared almost instantly. He stopped walking. The scent had been there only for a heartbeat, yet his wolf reacted immediately, lifting its head with quiet certainty. Somewhere nearby, the mystery had returned. Meanwhile, Emily stood alone inside the Eastern preparation room, desperately searching every shelf for forgotten herbs. Glass jars lined the walls from floor to ceiling, but each one held ordinary remedies that could not replace the rare mountain flowers she had spent years gathering herself. The elderly healer quietly entered behind her and understood everything before Emily spoke a single word. "You have run out," she said softly. Emily nodded without turning around. "Nothing is working anymore." The older woman approached with gentle concern in her eyes. "Then you must leave the palace for tonight." Emily looked up in surprise. "Leave?" "The forest beyond the eastern gate is quiet during the full moon. Sometimes distance is the safest medicine." Emily closed her eyes. Running had never solved anything, yet staying no longer felt possible. Before sunset, she quietly slipped through a servant's entrance carrying only a small satchel and a light gray cloak. She avoided the main roads, choosing narrow stone paths that disappeared into the ancient pines beyond the palace walls. The deeper she walked into the forest, the quieter the world became. Wind whispered through towering branches, while silver moonlight spilled across the ground like flowing water. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to breathe, without pretending everything was normal. The warmth inside her remained, but away from crowded hallways and curious eyes, the fear slowly loosened its grip. Back inside the palace, Nathaniel suddenly stopped in the middle of the western corridor. His wolf had become completely alert. The faint mystery that had teased his instincts for days was moving farther away instead of closer. He frowned, turning toward the eastern windows overlooking the forest. "She left," he murmured before realizing he had spoken aloud. Captain Rowan, who had been walking several steps behind him, looked confused. "Your Majesty?" Nathaniel remained silent for a long moment. He could not explain what he sensed because he barely understood it himself. Nothing dangerous threatened the kingdom. No enemy crossed the border. Yet every instinct urged him toward the forest beyond the eastern gate. "Cancel tomorrow morning's patrol inspection," he finally said. "I will be riding tonight." Rowan blinked in surprise. "Tonight, Your Majesty? Alone?" Nathaniel nodded once. "There is something I need to find." Far beneath the moonlit pines, Emily reached a quiet clearing beside a narrow stream where wildflowers glowed softly in the pale light. She knelt beside the water, cupping the cool current in her hands before gently splashing it across her face. The breeze carried away the last traces of cedar and moon mint that had protected her for years. She did not realize it, but for the very first time since her rejection, nothing remained between her true scent and the night air drifting through Blackwood Forest, and miles away the Alpha King quietly turned his horse toward the same silver path, without knowing exactly why his heart had suddenly chosen that direction. The forest seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the full moon, every pine branch swaying gently as silver light spilled across the narrow trails. Emily remained beside the quiet stream, letting the cool night air steady her. Racing thoughts. For the first time in years, there was nothing left to hide behind. The herbal mixtures had faded completely, and although she still wore the familiar scent of cedar from countless days spent among drying plants, something warmer and unmistakably her own drifted freely into the night. She wrapped her gray cloak tighter around her shoulders, unaware that the wind carried more than falling leaves through Blackwood Forest. Several miles away, Nathaniel guided his black stallion without maps or guards, following nothing except an instinct that grew stronger with every passing minute. He had spent his entire life trusting his wolf during storms, negotiations, and battles of will, yet he had never experienced anything like this. It was not simply a scent calling to him. It felt like recognition waiting just beyond reach, as though a forgotten promise had quietly awakened beneath the moon. He dismounted when the forest path narrowed, allowing the horse to graze while he continued on foot. Every breath sharpened his awareness. Every breeze seemed to whisper the same direction. The deeper he walked beneath the towering pines, the calmer his mind became even as his wolf grew more alert than ever before. Back beside the stream, Emily dipped her fingers into the cool water once again. The warmth inside her no longer frightened her as much as the loneliness that accompanied it. 3 years of hiding had taught her to believe she was safer alone than rejected a second time. She remembered the faces that had turned away beneath the sacred altar, the whispered conversations that followed her through the village, the sympathetic smiles that somehow hurt more than open cruelty. She had promised herself she would never again place her future in someone else's hands. A soft rustle echoed somewhere beyond the trees. Emily immediately stood, listening. Deer often wandered near the stream after sunset, and she assumed it was nothing more than another peaceful visitor searching for water. She turned back toward the moonlit current, never realizing another heartbeat had entered the clearing. Nathaniel stopped at the edge of the trees. Across the open space stood the quiet healer from his palace, her silver-gray cloak glowing beneath the moonlight, while the stream reflected tiny ribbons of light around her feet. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. The breeze shifted between them. Every remaining trace of cedar disappeared. Nathaniel finally inhaled without the barrier of herbs standing between instinct and truth. The world around him seemed to fall completely silent. His wolf did not grow restless. It became absolutely certain. The mysterious scent that had followed him through hallways and libraries for days now surrounded the clearing with gentle clarity, carrying warmth, quiet resilience, and something that felt deeply familiar, although they had barely spoken. His pulse quickened despite every effort to remain composed. Emily sensed someone watching and slowly turned toward the trees. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized the tall figure standing beneath the moonlit branches. "Your Majesty," she whispered, taking one involuntary step backward. Nathaniel did not answer immediately. He remained where he was, breathing slowly as though carefully mastering emotions he refused to let control him. His silver eyes never left hers, not with possessiveness or fear, but with profound disbelief. Emily immediately understood what had happened. The herbs were gone. The wind had betrayed her. Instinct urged her to leave before another word could be spoken. She turned toward the narrow trail leading deeper into the forest, but before she could take another step, Nathaniel quietly spoke her name. "Emily." It was the first time she had ever heard him say it, and somehow it sounded less like a command than a quiet certainty. She stopped without looking back. "Please," she said softly, her voice trembling despite every attempt to remain calm. "Do not come any closer." Nathaniel respected the distance between them, yet his wolf resisted every instinct telling him to let her disappear into the darkness again. He finally understood why every encounter had felt unfinished, why every scent had faded just before revealing itself, and why silence had always seemed to follow her like a shadow. Whatever secret she had carried for years had reached its end beneath the full moon, and although every instinct inside him urged him forward, the man remained perfectly still, choosing patience over impulse because somewhere deep within his heart he knew that if destiny had truly brought them together, then trust would have to arrive before anything else. Emily kept her eyes on the narrow trail ahead, afraid that if she looked back, everything she had fought to protect would disappear in a single heartbeat. The forest had become impossibly still. Even the stream beside her seemed to flow more quietly beneath the silver glow of the full moon. She heard Nathaniel take one slow breath, but true to her request, he did not move any closer. That simple act of restraint unsettled her more than any display of authority ever could. Most alpha wolves she had known believed power meant taking what they wanted the moment instinct demanded it. Nathaniel remained exactly where he stood, giving her the space she had asked for. "You should return to the palace, Your Majesty," Emily whispered without turning around. "Tonight is not a night you should spend here." Nathaniel answered with the same calm voice she had come to recognize inside the quiet halls of Blackwood Palace. I searched half the forest because something inside me refused to let you disappear again. I do not believe leaving now would be the right choice. Emily closed her eyes. There was no anger in his words, no command, only quiet honesty. That somehow made the truth even harder to hide. She slowly turned to face him, moonlight reflecting in her pale blue eyes. Everything you sensed these past few days was never supposed to happen. I worked very hard to make sure of that. Nathaniel studied her expression with growing concern. Why? A faint, bittersweet smile crossed her face before fading almost immediately. Because I already know what rejection feels like. The words settled heavily between them. Nathaniel remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. Emily wrapped her arms around herself as though trying to hold together memories she had spent years keeping locked away. 3 years ago, the moon ceremony declared that I had found my destined mate. Before the night ended, he rejected me in front of everyone. After that, people stopped seeing me as Emily. They only saw someone who had not been chosen. She lowered her gaze toward the flowing stream. I decided no one would ever have the chance to look at me that way again. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. The more she spoke, the more the quiet sadness he had sensed beneath her gentle smile finally revealed itself. The herbs were never for healing, she continued softly. They were for hiding. If no alpha could recognize my scent, then no one could pity me. No one could whisper about me. No one could reject me again. Nathaniel felt something tighten inside his chest. During his years as king, he had witnessed disputes over territory, pride, and tradition, but hearing someone describe years spent hiding from simple kindness felt heavier than any political burden he carried. Emily, he said gently, look at me. She hesitated before finally raising her eyes. Nathaniel met her gaze without hesitation. You believed hiding was the only way to protect yourself. She gave the smallest nod. Yes. And you believed every alpha would judge you because one man did. Tears shimmered along her lashes, although none escaped. That is how it always felt. Nathaniel drew one slow breath, carefully mastering the powerful certainty rising inside him. His wolf no longer questioned what destiny had revealed beneath the full moon, yet the man refused to let instinct speak louder than compassion. Instead of stepping toward her, he slowly lowered himself onto one knee where he stood, placing himself below her eye level. Emily stared in complete disbelief. No ruler in Blackwood Kingdom had knelt before an ordinary healer in living memory. Nathaniel's voice remained steady. Then allow me to be the first alpha who proves that fear wrong. Emily's breath caught. She had expected surprise, perhaps confusion, maybe even disappointment. She had never imagined respect. The distance between them remained exactly the same, yet everything had changed. The silence that followed no longer felt frightening. It felt peaceful. Above them the moon shone through the ancient pines, while the quiet stream carried silver reflections across the clearing. Emily slowly realized that throughout their entire conversation, Nathaniel had never once crossed the boundary she had asked him to keep. He had controlled every instinct because her comfort mattered more to him than satisfying his own questions. For the first time since the night of her rejection, the wall she had built around her heart no longer felt impossible to lower. And somewhere beyond the trees, hidden among the shadows of the forest, another pair of unseen eyes quietly watched the impossible scene before hurrying back toward the palace with a story that would change Blackwood Kingdom before the next sunrise. The first light of dawn spread across Blackwood Forest as Emily and Nathaniel walked back toward the palace, leaving several respectful feet between them just as they had throughout the night. Neither felt the need to fill the silence. Too much had changed beneath the moon for ordinary conversation to carry its weight. By the time the palace gates appeared through the morning mist, word had already begun traveling faster than either of them realized. The stable hand who had watched the king ride alone into the forest had seen him return beside the quiet healer. The guard stationed at the eastern gate noticed that His Majesty waited for Emily to pass through first before entering himself. Small details became whispers. Whispers became stories. Stories spread through the palace before breakfast. Emily lowered her head as servants paused in their work to glance toward her. The familiar feeling of being judged returned so quickly that her chest tightened. She had hoped the night would remain hidden inside the forest forever. Nathaniel noticed the change immediately. Come with me, he said gently. Emily hesitated. Your Majesty, people are already talking. Then they should hear the truth instead of creating their own. Before she could answer, Lord Benedict Blackwood approached with several members of the Royal Council following behind him. His expression carried equal parts relief and concern. Your Majesty, we have searched the palace since dawn. We feared something had happened. Nathaniel gave a calm nod. Nothing happened that requires alarm. Benedict's eyes shifted toward Emily. He recognized the young healer from the royal wing, yet the unusual silence surrounding the pair made even him curious. May I ask why Miss Carter accompanied your Majesty through the forest? Several nearby servants slowed their work without appearing obvious, quietly waiting for the answer. Emily instinctively stepped backward, wishing she could disappear before every eye settled upon her once again. Nathaniel noticed the movement. Without hesitation, he stepped slightly to one side, placing himself where every person in the courtyard could see him clearly. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried the quiet authority of a king who never needed to raise his voice. Because she was never in danger from me. The courtyard fell silent. Nathaniel continued before anyone else could speak. For years, Emily Carter believed she had to hide herself because someone convinced her that rejection defined her worth. His silver eyes slowly moved across the gathered faces. That belief ends today. Emily looked up in surprise. She had never told him she wanted anyone to know. She certainly had never expected him to speak for her. Nathaniel turned toward her with the same quiet respect he had shown throughout the night. You once told me that your herbs existed to keep people from judging you. Emily nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes. Then you no longer need them. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. They were not tears of fear this time. They came from hearing someone speak to the part of herself she had spent years hiding from the world. Nathaniel slowly faced the council once more. I have spent many years choosing leaders for this kingdom. Courage has never belonged only to warriors. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who continues showing kindness after being given every reason to stop. Even the oldest council members lowered their eyes in thoughtful silence. The servants who had whispered only moments earlier now looked toward Emily with entirely different expressions. Not pity, respect. Nathaniel took one measured step closer, stopping well before crossing the distance she had once asked him to keep. Emily Carter has served this palace faithfully while carrying burdens that none of us ever noticed. That failure belongs to us, not to her. The words settled across the courtyard more powerfully than any formal decree. Emily finally lifted her head completely, meeting the eyes of those around her without shrinking away for the first time in years. Somewhere in the crowd, one young servant quietly smiled before another followed, and then another, until the atmosphere that had once been filled with silent judgment slowly transformed into quiet admiration. Nathaniel watched the change with relief rather than satisfaction. He knew healing could not happen in a single morning. Trust would take time. So would forgiveness. But as sunlight spread across the palace stones and the fear slowly disappeared from Emily's eyes, he realized that sometimes the greatest victory a king could offer his kingdom was not another law or another conquest. Sometimes it was simply reminding everyone that dignity could never be taken away from someone who had never stopped choosing kindness. Several weeks passed, and with each new sunrise Blackwood Palace felt a little different. The whispers that had once followed Emily through every hallway slowly disappeared, replaced by warm greetings from servants who had finally learned her name instead of her past. She still rose before dawn to prepare fresh herbs, but no longer to conceal herself. Now she blended cedar, lavender, moon mint, and healing flowers simply because bringing comfort to others had always been the gift she treasured most. The small bottles that had once represented years of fear remained untouched on the highest shelf of her room, until one quiet morning she gathered them into a wooden box and carried them into the palace gardens. Beneath the same old cedar tree where she often paused before beginning her work, she buried the empty glass bottles beneath fresh soil. She smiled softly as she pressed the earth flat with both hands. She was not burying her past. She was burying her fear of it. Nathaniel found her there moments later, carrying 2 steaming cups of herbal tea instead of royal documents. I thought you might appreciate a quiet breakfast, he said with an easy smile. Emily accepted the cup with grateful hands. You are becoming very familiar with the herb garden, Your Majesty. He looked around at the blooming flowers. Perhaps I simply enjoy visiting the person who cares for it. Emily laughed, a light, genuine sound that surprised even herself. It had been years since laughter had come so naturally. They walked slowly through the gardens while morning sunlight painted golden patterns across the stone paths. Nathaniel never rushed beside her. He never assumed trust had fully healed overnight. Instead, he continued proving through countless small moments that patience could be stronger than pride. When council meetings ran late, he quietly thanked her for refreshing the library. When young servants struggled with difficult tasks, he often asked Emily to teach them about healing plants because he had noticed how calmly they listened to her. Without realizing it, she had become someone others sought for guidance rather than someone they quietly avoided. One afternoon, the elderly healer who had first taught Emily about herbs stopped beside the garden gate, watching the two of them from a distance. "You no longer carry suppressant bottles," she observed with a knowing smile. Emily shook her head. "I do not need them anymore." The older woman nodded gently. "No, because you finally found something stronger than herbs." Emily looked toward Nathaniel, who was patiently helping a young stable boy replant a damaged flower bed, without caring that dirt now covered the sleeves of his royal coat. She understood exactly what the healer meant. It had never been destiny alone that changed her life. It had been kindness freely chosen. As autumn slowly painted the forests with shades of crimson and gold, Blackwood Kingdom gathered beneath the great moon terrace for the annual harvest blessing. Wolves from every village filled the palace courtyard, waiting for their king to offer the traditional words welcoming another season. Nathaniel stepped onto the ancient stone platform, but instead of speaking immediately, he turned toward Emily standing quietly among the healers. He extended his hand across the space between them. The courtyard fell silent. Emily hesitated only for a heartbeat before walking forward with calm confidence. She placed her hand in his, not because she feared standing alone, but because she no longer did. Nathaniel faced the gathered kingdom. "Every harvest teaches the same lesson," he said. "The strongest trees are not those that never face winter. They are the ones that continue growing after it has passed." His eyes briefly met Emily's before returning to the crowd. "Judge no heart by its deepest wound, because sometimes the people who have suffered the most become the ones who bring the greatest hope to everyone around them." Warm applause slowly spread through the courtyard until it echoed across the palace walls. Emily looked out at the faces before her and realized something remarkable. She no longer searched for signs of rejection. She found smiles instead. As evening settled over Blackwood Kingdom and the first stars appeared above the ancient forest, Emily and Nathaniel stood together overlooking the quiet gardens where everything had begun. The moon shone gently across the cedar trees, carrying the fragrance of fresh herbs through the cool night air. Emily breathed deeply without hiding who she was, and for the first time in many years the night no longer felt like something to survive. It felt like home, because true strength had never come from concealing her heart, and true love had never asked her to become someone else. It had simply found the woman who remained kind even after the world gave her every reason not to be, and in doing so reminded an entire kingdom that the greatest destiny is not being chosen because you are perfect, but being cherished because you never lost your compassion.